You've heard that in order to speak better French, you need to think in French and stop translating from English. But how do you stop translating from English and think in French if you don't know much French or as much French as you do English? And besides, is it even true? Does thinking in French make you better at French? Well, that's what we're going to explore in today's video. Allez, c'est parti! Bienvenue to a new video tout le monde, and now you guys know if you've been following me for a while that I am not French, I am English, but I live in France and have learned the French language as an adult. So I like to give tips based on my opinion and my experience of learning the French language in order to help some of you out there. Now, I've been in your position where a French person or many French people have said to me, to get better at your French, you need to start thinking in French. And I thought, well, that sounds right, but how the hell do I do that, seeing as I don't have as many words in my head in French as I do in English? How do I even think in French? How is that going to make me better at French if I can't even do it? I have to translate, right? Because to get to what I want in French, I've got to go from English. Alors, the problem here, as I see it, is that we have a bit of a chicken and egg scenario going on. If you're not sure what that means, basically in this context it means we don't know whether knowing more French will help us think in French or whether thinking in French will help us improve our French, right? Thinking in French is something that took me a long time, and it's definitely not something that just happens overnight. So I think that a lot of the videos on how to stop translating are misleading because they almost suggest, indirectly or directly, that you can just sort of do it. But that's not how it works. So I want to share with you 3 ways that I found that I started to think in French and to stop translating in my head, and stay around until the end to see the verdict about whether or not thinking in French does indeed make you a better French speaker. But if you're enjoying this video and want to stay up to date with all my latest videos that come out every single Sunday, click on that big red subscribe button and the little bell notification icon next to it. Alors, la première chose que je veux partager avec vous aujourd'hui is that I talk to myself, just like right then. Okay, that was more talking to you, but just a few seconds before I was practicing it a few times to myself, reading it off my phone and getting ready to start this bit of the video. And I do this throughout my day, whether I'm working on something or working out or just going about an everyday task. Often I'll find myself muttering under my breath, trying to work out what that action would be in French or what the object I'm holding is in French. When I was reviewing my notes earlier for this video, I'd written out in English because obviously I'm doing the video in English and the title needs to be in English to grab my audience's attention. I was thinking about what that could be in French, rolling around a couple of ideas in my head. Est-ce que penser en français te rend mieux en français? Ou est-ce que penser en français fait que tu parles mieux français? Quelque chose comme ça. And this will lead me to think about those words in French using what I already know. You might be thinking, well, how can you actually think about that stuff in French if you don't know it in French to begin with? Well, unless you're an absolute beginner starting from zero, you have some French. You know how to think about what you want to say, and you can figure out how to construct it. You might not get the exact word without looking something up, but just the process of trying to force yourself to think about a benign activity that you would do any given day of the week, but do it in French, will trigger you to figure stuff out, figure out how you would say it in French, and that would lead you, or that leads me to think about it in French. And if I don't have the exact word already in my vocabulary, I will 7, 8 times out of 10, when I can be bothered, I will look it up on my phone there and then in reverso and think, that's interesting, didn't know that word, And then that will start the process of bedding that into my head. Next time I'm doing that activity, it might come up in my mind that I'm already thinking about it automatically in French because I did it last time. And if I'm perhaps doing a workout at home, there will be opportunities there to think more in French from the basics like counting my reps.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
And then wanting to talk to myself about how many sets I have left. These sort of things pass through your mind in English and just disappear before you go on to the next thing. When you're learning French, you need to keep it more in the forefront of your mind and keep that thought there because it leads you to other realizations and other discoveries, like this example here.
Il me reste une série, mais une série de quoi? Comment s'appelle pull-ups? Comment ça s'appelle pull-ups? Pull-ups. Pull-up ou traction? Des pull-ups ou des tractions? Ok, ça marche. Il me reste une série de tractions.
So yeah, I found that forcing myself at the beginning to talk to myself in French will mean that obviously I get stuck, just like I would get stuck in a two-way interaction. But this time I can have the time to look stuff up if I need to, or to change my thought process. And after a while, this becomes more of an automatism. And now, just going about my day, I can't remember when this started. It's been so long, but it's now just a habit that I will just talk to myself in French, and that will give me little wins throughout the day because I'll have the opportunity to learn new words. And then the next time, I'll be thinking about them directly in French. Numéro 2 is for everything that's in my private space, whether it be for personal or professional use, as long as it's just for me, I'll often, not all the time, but often take the time to name and rename things like files, folders, pages in French. Just like this example the other day when I was redoing my sort of daily planner schedule around personal and professional stuff, and I wanted the titles of the different sections to be in French, so I had to go and change them. Now, of course, I didn't have to do this, but I wanted to do it.
Alors, to-do list today, en français, c'est quoi? To do, c'est quoi? To do. Ok, je fais simple. Liste des tâches à faire. Tâches à faire. C'est toujours difficile à écrire, d'écrire ce mot. Voilà, liste des tâches à faire aujourd'hui.
Some words, names, phrases I'll be confident enough to write down in French without going to look them up for translation. But even if I do translate, I will take the time to manually move the translation across to where I need it to be. I don't copy paste, I write them down one by one. I make that extra fiddly effort to put the accents on the characters because these are all extra seconds spent thinking and focusing on the French that I want to do. And this all leads me to internalizing it and then being able to think about it later on, because these are things that I do in my day-to-day life. I'm regularly going to have to think about going to that page, finding that folder, searching for it. Now, you could argue that there's always a better way to write it, but sometimes you just got to be like, that's French. That makes sense to me. I think that's grammatically right. And then you're going to get on with the next task. But all these extra seconds that you take throughout the day quickly accumulate into practice time that you've spent on French, rather than sort of rushing through these what can be banal tasks in English just to get to your 1 hour of dedicated French practice later on in the day. This way, it's integrated into my daily life, and then because I've taken the time to figure out these things in French, I'm then gonna be more easily able to think in French when I'm referring to them to someone or to myself, or thinking where to look them up, because I'll have the names stored in French from that those few minutes that I spent working it out the other day. The more time I spend writing in French, the less time overall I end up spending on translation, because that writing has involved deep thought around the words and the structure of the sentences, something we don't often do in English because it comes so easily to us. Numéro 3 is that I learn stuff in French first. Now, this happens a lot of the time by accident, just by living in France and the sort of conversations that you have to have. And believe me, it doesn't happen nearly enough as I would like it to. However, it's still kind of funny every time you realize that you don't know how to say something in English, or at least you have to think harder to get to the English word in your head. And that's also a great feeling of satisfaction. Well, it's a confusing feeling for French learners because you're like, oh, I'm losing my English, but the French came first. And a great example of this is when I'm talking about, believe me, this does come up more often than you'd think, talking about storing stuff in la cave of your apartment. I never think of something like basement first. Even when I say basement, I think of someone living in the basement. In France, a lot of apartments and homes have an extra space either in the bottom of the building or in the bottom of the house called la cave, and it's just for storage. So now, if we're talking about this, I'll talk about it in English, and then I'll just, in the middle of the sentence, have to go with la cave. And because the people around me live here as well, they understand it. And it's sort of this creation of franglais, right? This new language that's coming up because of exposure to certain words first in French rather than in English. So when I encounter words in French first, when I need to use them, I'm going to be thinking about them in French without doing any translation because there's no translation to be done. And if I could harness that more often, it would be super powerful and I would improve so much faster. Another example is that this year I've had to deal with a lot of business French as I've set up my coaching business and I've got more serious about YouTube. And so as a result of that, I've had to deal with accounting stuff in French. Now, I never had to do that in English because when I was in the UK or last in an English-speaking country, I didn't work for myself. I didn't set up properly as self-employed. So I never learned any of this technical stuff in French. So now I'm more likely to talk about une facture d'acompte and la gestion commerciale without immediately knowing how to talk about that in English. And that's because I encountered it first in French. You know, when you can explain a concept concisely and simply and clearly in English, and it's really frustrating that you can't do that in French because you're more limited. Well, every so often now, that will happen for me in the other direction, and it's because I learned it first in French. And my point here is that because I've been exposed to these things first and more in French than in English, I tend to think about them in French. So the tip here is that the more time of your life you spend in a particular context, be it a particular conversation topic, be it a particular person, a place, when it comes to talking about these things, you're going to actually go to French first because that's the language you associate with it in your mind. Ça, c'est plus simple à dire qu'à faire, but I think that is because it takes time to change habits. Now, the situations where this comes easiest is when we're sort of thrown into them. For example, if you work at a French-speaking company, your French is going to improve very quickly because you have no choice really, and you are going to be confronted with new stuff in French. So it won't take very long for that to see a change. But a lot of us, we have to push ourselves to create these contexts, create these situations, and that's hard for us adults because these is all about habits, and habits take time to build and habits take time to break. But I think if you are able to appreciate the little steps of progress, then you are going to feel like this is working sooner than someone else, because this does take a long time to properly bed in and become a big part of how you think. But it does work. It's all about time and exposure. But the easiest way to do this that I can think of, and I do this entre guillemets because it's easy in theory, is to read more in French, especially on a topic where you know something of the subject matter, right? Because by reading in French, you're going to get the gist quite easily of what's going on. You won't know all the words, but you'll figure out words due to your familiarity with the context. Okay, some of them you'll have to look up if you don't know enough of the context in a particular paragraph, for example. But if you know 60, 70% of the context, you'll go past words and you're like, I figure out what that means. But you didn't spend the time going to a translator and figuring it out. Right? And every time I think you connect a French word with an internal meaning of it that you have, that will lead to you actually being able to think about that particular thing or topic later immediately in French rather than English because you came across it in a French context. I'm really bad about doing this. I know that I should read my sports news, for example, every day in French if I want to make this happen faster, but I go with comfort a lot of the time and end up on BBC and Sky Sports because it's easier, like I say. But I'm quite happy with the progress of my French, so I'm okay with that. But I know that it would go a lot faster if I made a daily habit of just reading my news and sports news in French. Thankfully, because I live in France and I'm exposed to the language enough, I still continually improve because I am always keen to speak and to listen and pick up new stuff. So it's a balance, and everyone's balance in life is different. But if you're not as lucky as me to live in a French-speaking country, then you have to create those opportunities for yourself. Alors, my take on how to think in French is that you need to force your brain to do it by talking to yourself in the French that you do know, because it will trigger reflection on what's missing or what you can do better, and that will lead you to understand more and therefore think more in French. Secondly is to Frenchify your personal environment, and thirdly is to spend as much time in French as possible in whatever context, because you will then start to associate French more with that context and naturally think more in French when referring or even thinking about that context. So, does thinking in French make you better at French? Well, my answer is oui, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Like many things in French, it's a process and you don't get there overnight. It's the result of many different little actions accumulating over time. And if you're capable of appreciating every bit of progress, then you're going to see results very quickly. If you are expecting some big change overnight, then you're going to be disappointed. So take it slowly. It's all about progrès, pas perfection. At every single stage of your French journey, there will be things that you want to say in conversation that you don't know yet. What are you going to do? Stay quiet? No, you're going to say exactly what you know. So do that with yourself. Let me know that you're on board, guys, with the Progrès pas perfection movement by dropping the hashtag down in the comments. So that's my take on how to think in French and whether or not it actually does make you a better French speaker. C'est tout pour cette vidéo tout le monde. J'espère qu'elle vous a plu. Just before you go, I'd like to remind you that if you haven't already, you can get your copy of my free guide, How to Be a Confident French Speaker, down in the description below. It contains 6 of my top tips and techniques for how to do it based on my experience, my years of experience learning as an adult. Merci beaucoup to all my supporters on YouTube and over on Ko-fi. I couldn't do these videos without you. Thank you so much for your support. But until next time tout le monde, merci beaucoup d'avoir regardé. À la prochaine. Ciao.